Hey there, and welcome to The Explainer. We're about to jump into one of the biggest questions there is. What's the real secret to creativity? And yeah, we're going to figure out how to fly a horse. So let's get into it.
So really, where do great ideas come from? I mean, for centuries, we've been fed this one, very specific, kind of romantic story about how it all works. And it usually sounds a little something like this.
Right? This is from a letter supposedly written by Mozart where he says his greatest symphonies just popped into his head, fully formed all at once in this flash of divine genius. All he had to do was write it down. It's a beautiful story. It's inspired artists and scientists for generations. There's just one tiny problem. It's almost certainly a complete hoax. And that hoax is part of a much, much bigger myth.
And that brings us to our first big idea, what we call the genius myth. You know, the idea that real creation is saved for a special few people who are just touched by magic? Look, this myth is super appealing, right? But it's also paralyzing. It basically tells us that if ideas don't strike you like a bolt of lightning, well, then you must not be one of the creative ones. But this whole story we've been told is built on fake anecdotes and myths, just like that Mozart letter. It's time for a major reality check. Because the truth is way simpler, and honestly, way more powerful. Creation isn't magic. It's just work. And it's not for a select few. It's something all of us are actually built to do. It's totally ordinary. So this is where we just trade the old myth for the new reality. Let's throw out this idea of a magical leap and replace it with a practical process. Instead of waiting for inspiration, we take small, deliberate steps. And this is crucial. We have to accept that failure isn't a sign you're not creative. Failure is just a fundamental part of the work itself. And to really see this in action, we need to talk about vanilla. And to do that, we actually need to talk about a 12-year-old boy named Edmund. So get this, for more than 300 years after Europeans first found vanilla, nobody could figure out how to grow it outside of Mexico. The plants would grow, but they'd never produce any vanilla beans. Then, in 1841, on this tiny island called Réunion, a 12-year-old slave named Edmund cracked the code. So was he a genius? Was it a miracle? Nope. Turns out the guy who owned the plantation had shown Edmund how to hand-pollinate watermelons. So Edmund, just out of sheer curiosity, tried the same ordinary trick on the vanilla flower. And it worked! An ordinary act that completely transformed a global industry. This step-by-step process is exactly how our minds actually work. Take the famous candle problem. Most people get totally stuck because of this thing called functional fixedness. You see the box and you just think, that holds the tax. The solution isn't some giant leap of genius. It's a tiny incremental step. You just reframe what the box is for. You see it not for what it is, but for what it could be. And this isn't some weird lab test. It's the exact same mental wall we hit when we think we've already tried everything. And you see this exact same process at the highest levels of innovation. I mean, when Steve Jobs and his team were designing the iPhone, they didn't just dream it up in one shot. They went through a loop. Their first solution to the keyboard problem was a stylus. But that created a new problem. You know, people lose them all the time. So they took the next step. It's just a chain of problems and solutions. It's ordinary thinking, one small step at a time. Look at this number. 5,126. That's how many prototypes James Dyson made of his cyclonic vacuum cleaner. That is an incredible number of failures. And this is the number of successes that changed everything. Just one. It proves that creation is a numbers game. It's about endurance, it's about trying again and again, not waiting around for one perfect idea to just magically appear. Okay, so if creativity is really just ordinary work, and it's a step-by-step process that's available to literally everyone, then why does it feel so hard sometimes? And why are new ideas so often shot down? Well, it turns out our own brains are kind of wired to fight against them. So the key idea here is something called inattentional blindness. Think of your brain as this incredibly efficient filtering machine. To deal with all the information flying at you every second, it learns to see what it expects to see. But the downside is, it also learns to completely ignore what it doesn't expect to see, even when it's staring you right in the face. This is one of the wildest examples of that. You have expert radiologists, people whose entire job is to spot tiny, almost invisible details. And they look right at an image of a gorilla, and their brains just edit it out. Why? Because you don't expect to see a gorilla in a lung scan. Their own expertise, the very thing that makes them so good at their job, actually made them blind to the unexpected. And this same blindness happens with big, new ideas. For 3 decades, a scientist named Judah Folkman tried to convince the world that tumors survive by growing their own blood vessels. This was a revolutionary idea that has now led to life-saving cancer treatments. But because it went against what everyone believed, the obvious facts of the time, he was totally dismissed. People didn't just disagree, they literally called him a charlatan and walked out of his lectures.
Folkman's story really shows us what this quote means. Creation isn't about that one brilliant idea. It's about endurance. It's about having the grit to stay in the game, to keep doing the work, and to just refuse to quit when the whole world is telling you you're wrong.
Okay, so we've busted the myth. We've faced the fact that our brains are tricky. Now for the most important part. How do we actually do this? How do we learn to fly a horse? Well, first, we need to take back a very, very powerful word.
Our modern idea of genius comes from this 19th century guy who argued it was a rare trait only a few people inherited. But that is not what the word originally meant. In ancient Rome, your genius was the spirit of creation that they believed was inside every single person. It wasn't something you had, it was a force inside you that you could connect with. And that is the reality.
You know, creating new things isn't some special skill. It's our species-defining feature. For 150,000 years, early humans made the exact same stone tools, generation after generation. Then about 50,000 years ago, something just clicked. We started improving things. That drive to innovate, to make things better, that is our evolutionary superpower. It's what we do.
So the practical way to tap into this is to cultivate what's called a beginner's mind. That just means looking at problems as if you're seeing them for the very first time. This lets you see all the things that the experts, with their inattentional blindness, might miss. It means you have to question the obvious facts that are probably holding everyone else back. It's about being willing to try and fail and learn from the process, not just trying to get a perfect result on your first shot.
And at the end of the day, this is what it means to be a genius in the truest sense. It's not about trying to be Mozart or Einstein. It's about embracing your own unique perspective, your curiosity, your weird way of connecting ideas. It's really just about being the one most like yourself.
So in the end, the genius myth isn't just wrong, it's an excuse. It's a really good excuse not to try, not to endure, not to do the ordinary, sometimes boring work that leads to extraordinary things. So the only question left is, now that you have no excuses, what are you going to build?